So good morning, everybody. Welcome to another STC webinar. As you all know, this is part of a series. My name is Pim van Baarsen. I'm CEO for the Service and Technology Cluster. As I was saying, this is part of a series. We haven't done one of these for a couple of weeks now because we've been busy with some of our events and things. But delighted to be back now with another webinar hosted by the excellent Philip, who will start to explain in a second what it's all about. I just very briefly wanted to point out that, obviously we at the STC, we do these webinars, we do various events. Please do check out our website for our upcoming events and the upcoming webinars, and obviously sign up for all the ones that you're interested in. We also have a YouTube channel where you can watch our previous events and our previous webinars, so please have a look at those as well. There's lots of valuable stuff in there, so please make sure that you plug into that. Obviously, we're always available if you wanted to get in touch with regards to membership or even some of our Be the Business programs. We offer SME advisory boards. We offer mentoring for growth, leadership pathways, which is leadership training. So lots of really good stuff, all delivered free of charge. So I would encourage everybody to have a look at our website in the growth section, have a look at our Be the Business programs, and then obviously get in touch with us if you're interested in taking any of those up. And it can be in various ways. So for instance, with the mentoring, we're looking for both mentors as well as mentees. So if you want to be mentored, it's a great outline. But if you would like to be a mentor, it's a great opportunity as well. So please do check all of those out and get in touch. But that's enough sales for the moment, I think. So what I'll do now is I'll hand over to Philip Guest. So Philip is from Oxford Strategy, very much an expert when it comes to business strategy, also a lecturer as well. So he's got a huge amount of valuable knowledge to impart. And actually, this is the second session that we're doing with Philip. So he previously did something about finding your next business opportunity. That's available to view on YouTube. So do have a look at that. And then today he's going to talk us through the PESTLE framework. Just a bit of housekeeping. I would say that Philip is going to do his presentation. If you do have any questions, could you please put those in the chat, and then I'll go through them and ask them to Philip sort of afterwards. And then obviously when Philip is done, we can then kind of turn it more into an open conversation. But if any questions pop up during the presentation, please put them in the chat, and I can take them forward to him. But with that, I think I'll hand over to Philip now. Philip, over to you. All right.
Thank you very much indeed, Pim, for the presentation. Thank you as always to STC for offering us all the opportunity to get together. It's always much appreciated, especially in this sort of strange world where we don't see as much of each other as we normally would. It's great to see so many of you here today. Thank you very much for coming. Lots of familiar faces. Hi to all of you that I know already, and welcome to those of you that I've not met or not met properly as opposed to virtually. Thank you for joining us. Let me just do, hopefully screen share is working. Pim, can you give me a thumbs up if screen share works? Yes, it does. Where are we going today? Pim and I talked a lot about what would be useful in this presentation, building on the last webinar that I did. Now, that one, I think some of you were in. We talked about how to gain a sustainable competitive advantage. And we talked about three concepts of value, rareness, and inimitability. Hope that was helpful. Some of you have come back, so maybe it was. This time, we're going to look at some ways of marshalling your imagination towards finding your next business opportunity. Excuse me, I'm just moving screens around for myself. This method that I'm going to introduce you to today, PESTLE, is one that you may very well be familiar with. If you are, hopefully this will be a useful refresher and also a reminder to use it. And the problem with all of these ideas is that we know, a lot of them we know and we understand, but we forget to use them from time to time. I'm the same as everybody else. It's only one method for finding business opportunities, but in my experience, it can be useful for most businesses. And if after this presentation you want to spend 20 minutes just, with a cup of coffee and a pen and paper and just whiz through the ideas, then maybe something good will come of it. And I'd be very interested, and I'm sure Pim would too, to know if it has been helpful. A couple of words on my experience. I founded Oxford Strategy just after I left Oxford University, where I did my master's about 4 years ago now. What do? We help senior management solve business problems, the sort of business problems that keep them awake at night. Hopefully you will sleep a bit better after this, but do pay attention for the next 20 minutes or so. After each section, of which there are 6, I will revert to Pim to see if there are any immediate chat questions that relate to that particular section. And at the very end of the presentation, which hopefully only take about 20 minutes, we'll have a longer Q&A and hopefully an interactive discussion. So for now, questions in the chat, but please know there will be an opportunity to ask them at the end as well. So what's the main thrust of this? I mean, you know, we all run our businesses and we all build our businesses. We often build our businesses around the current environment, but the environment changes and we are constantly being disrupted by changes in the environment. And it is very frustrating when we see existing revenue streams and existing profit streams and existing businesses suffer in the face of disruption. And it's one of the things that we all deal with. I mean, to be honest, disruption is something that everybody has been dealing with for the past year, and it's been, for many of us, difficult disruption. But it has thrown up opportunities, and perhaps for you, it's thrown up some opportunities as well. But disruption is a great place to look for opportunities as well. And I'm a big fan of metaphors and similes, and the one that I have for taking advantage of disruption, as I was sitting in the garden the other day, I was trying to think of a metaphor, and I saw a robin picking up a worm. And if you look at robins, you know, they look at disruption in a very particular way. It's the freshly dug border where they find their richest pickings. And I think in business we have a lot to learn from that as well. Certainly in my business, it's where there's been disruption, and my clients that are being disrupted or taking advantage of disruption are the most interesting ones. So PESTLE is the framework that I'm going to introduce. Now, look, why do I use this tool, this PESTLE tool? It's an acronym, and I'll come down to what it stands for. I use it because I don't have a crystal ball. None of us have a crystal ball. But just because we don't have a crystal ball doesn't mean we can't think about what the future holds and where disruption is going to come from. It's a classic strategy consulting tool. Lots of people use it. You possibly used it already yourselves, as I said. But don't let its age or its simplicity fool you. It's a really powerful way of turbocharging and focusing your business imagination. So let's start with the first P. The P is for political change, political disruption. This here is the Elizabeth Tower that houses the Parliament. It's the home of Big Ben. Now, I'm sure we all have our frustrations with the political classes, but if we take off our Facebook mindset, or in my case, if I take off my Facebook mindset and replace it with a sort of LinkedIn mindset, politically driven change, while it may generate threats, will also generate opportunities. For example, we can look through issues such as policy, funding, and taxation that impact both our personal and our work lives. And a change in any of these things does create opportunities. So while as a customer or a consumer, you might be frustrated now by the challenges of buying a spare part from Germany for your washing machine, the same frustration applies to business buyers of widgets. My challenge to you would be, are there opportunities for you to make widgets for the UK market that were previously made in Germany? And if it's not a widget, it might be a service or some other sort of product. So political change, personally frustrating perhaps for some of us, professionally frustrating perhaps for some of us, but definitely an opportunity for some of us, and one that we should try and consider somewhat positively. If anyone's got any quick questions on politics, please fire away. Nothing in the chat. If you want to shout out, please do. No, hopefully it made sense. So let's move on to the next topic in PESTLE. That's economic disruption. This is the Gherkin, you'll recognise it. It's my favourite modern building in London. I like the Brutalist architecture of the 1970s, but I think this is amazing, and it's a big representation of the economy of the southeast of England, at least, and financial services. Economic change is really important right now because we've had a year of major recession. But the thing about recessions is that they're always followed by a bounce back. And 2021 will be a year of bounce back, and 2022 will probably be a year of bounce back as well. Regardless of how Brexit and coronavirus evolve, which have two big economic impacts at the moment, and what they do for growth, employment, exchange rates, interest rates, inflation, etc., there will be an economic activity year. If you're a purchaser, if you're a purchaser, you'll probably know that you're going to be spending more money purchasing goods and services this year because you're going to be supplying more goods and services this year. So my recommendation would be is whenever there's an economic problem, be aware of the bounce back and be ready for it. Some things will change. I mean, I'm not saying everything's going to revert to how it was. 5-day-a-week commuting to the office for everyone in future? No thanks, not for me. I've got out of it, and I'm sure a lot of you have too. But where some companies have, unfortunately, had to abandon particular markets, there is also room for new entrants in new markets. My challenge to you would be, with your existing skills and abilities and insights, could that new entrant be you? Social change. Yes, of Pastel. This is I don't know if any of you have seen this stuff before. This is a Catalonian thing. It's called a Pastel. Villages come together and have these competitions to build these human towers. I'm not sure that it works as an activity in the age of social distancing, but I'll come back to the tower theme later on. What do I mean by social change? Cultural influences and attitudes. Look, I've always been challenged by social change, and I think that our individual attitudes tend often not to change that much. We are who we are, we grew up where we did, we have the experiences that we had, and we might not change that fast. And so from our own personal point of view, the social world doesn't necessarily evolve that quickly. However, we do see sometimes some very, very impactful events, and coronavirus is one of them, which impact us all and change the way all of us thinking. You know, people now need better home working spaces. That's a fact. There are some people who have to go and work in a particular place of employment, but for those of us, and I suspect this applies for many STC members, working from home is an option. So we're going to work from home more. We need a home working space that creates opportunities. They need the commuting car less. Perhaps they don't need the full-time season ticket or even car parking spaces. They want home lunches, better home coffee, more evening social lives, perhaps more flexibility in the way they go about things. And so these big one-off events like coronavirus can create sticky change across all cohorts of society. And the other thing is that there is also cohort change, which is that young people develop different attitudes to us, possibly older people. I know young people on the call as well. They have different attitudes to us. And so while our attitudes might not be changing, the prevalence of new attitudes amongst young people is what leads to societal change. And while I think we're all, as members of the Silverstone Technology Cluster, very well aware of what's happening in the environment, the world around us, in the earth, the climate, and the oceans, and we're aware of the impact that technology may have on those changes, a lot of the dialogue has been driven by young people. Now, I'm sort of indifferent to Greta Thunberg as a person and what she does, but the fact is that she represents how cohort change changes society. So while our opinions may be changing slowly as individuals, be aware of what how society's opinions are moving, and the opportunities that they create, because they will create sticky changes in everybody's behavior, and those changes may very well be your opportunity in the social dimension. So I touched on technology. I'm, for my sins, 53 years old, and I remember the first time I went to London, the most amazing thing that I saw was the post office tower. I grew up in Blackpool in Lancashire. Okay, we have our own tower in Blackpool, but it was nothing like this emblem of the technological advancement of the 1960s. This was built in 1964. So before I was born. Technological innovation can happen in two dimensions. One is disruptive and one is incremental. It sounds simple, but small incremental changes which happen over a long period of time can create an opportunity for radical change. We all get acclimatized to the world that we live in and the technology that we're working with, but lots and lots of incremental changes add up to a radical change. And it's certainly worthwhile to step back from time to time and ask ourselves, what is the sum of all those small changes? And if I were confronted with all of those small changes in one big reveal, would it actually prompt me into some sort of reaction beyond what I have at the moment? So technology, I like that. There's a guy called Charles Handy, you may very well have heard this, talked about the frog in the pan of boiling water. Now, he didn't do this as a real experiment, I'm pleased to say, but his thought experiment was this, which is that if you put a frog in a pan of cold water and you bring it to the boil, the frog only notices incremental changes and it stays in the pan, even as the water is boiling. But if you throw a frog into a pan of boiling water, it will hop out. And this is what we need to be aware of. We need to be careful that we're not the frog in the cold water that disregards all of the incremental changes without noticing that they add up to a radical change and possibly a threat to us and or an opportunity. I'm not sure how I would turn the pan of boiling water into an opportunity for the frog, but there you go. Talking of animals, E is for environment, and this is termite mound. There is a huge degree of environmental change. I think we all accept now that there are changes happening, not just in the air in terms of air quality and climate change, but also in the oceans and in the land around us. Ecology and environmental issues become very, very much more important. Now, it is a fact that we have been poisoning and depleting our natural world since the Industrial Revolution, arguably before, and doing nothing will probably create some disruption as nature fights back. But let me offer you two suggestions. One is much of the world's economy is oil-based at the moment, and whether that's as a fuel or as a plastic, it's what we run on. How much of your business model relies on oil? And as oil becomes less used and less preferred, how can you change your business model to capture that? And that doesn't just necessarily mean electric vehicles or hybrid vehicles. It means the use of plastics and other materials. So perhaps you can adapt to the different environment of a less oil world or a lower oil world. What are the substitutes and what are the opportunities there? I wrote this presentation a few months ago. For a number of reasons, we had to delay it. And when I wrote the presentation, the example that I gave that's on the slide was about the UK weather becoming more volatile. And how does this change requirements for weather protection in homes, offices, public spaces and clothing? It is a happy coincidence that the Met Office announced yesterday that they're going to invest, I think it's £1.2 billion in building one of the world's 20 top supercomputers for forecasting weather. Weather volatility is more important than it ever has been before. You're probably all aware that supermarkets use very sophisticated weather prediction technology and weather models in order to secure just-in-time delivery of the products that they need, depending upon what the weather is. Today is Thursday, and I imagine that yesterday the large supermarkets in the UK were placing their weekend orders for barbecue materials with their suppliers based on what they think the weather forecast is going to be, and distributing that around the country based on weather forecasts. So look, weather is incredibly important, environment's incredibly important, and it does represent an opportunity for you too. Finally, the sixth of the PESTLE acronym letters is legal. And we are all aware that law and regulation is evolving in a cavalcade of post-EU changes, in part driven by trade deal concessions. And as that legal environment changes, we need to keep on top of this and proactively assess the disruptive impact. So, for example, as we move towards recycling becomes more important. How could, for example, second life batteries as a power source change your business? Could you have a second life battery? Could you buy electricity at night for use during the day? Another example, the one I've given on the slide, is that as internal combustion engine cars are banned and replaced by typically heavier electric vehicles, particulate matter emission from tyres will increase. How will these additional emissions be abated? The answer will definitely come from technology, and it may very well come from somebody in the Silverstone technology cluster area. All of these things and all these challenges are opportunities for us. So there we go. I promised it would be short and sweet. PESTLE is a combination of political, economic, social, technology, environmental, and legal changes, but we can use it as a tool for finding new business opportunities as well as assessing threats. All your businesses will be disrupted from time to time by changes in the PESTLE factors, but hopefully, and this is my parting comment, in that disruption, you will find some opportunities to build a towering new business. Thank you. Hopefully, you may have some observations or questions.
Thank you very much, Philip. Fascinating stuff. I mean, obviously, when I was taught this, Pastel was spelled LE, so obviously an entirely different thing, right? No, very, very interesting. And if I may sort of jump in with the first question, what I think is quite interesting about this is kind of like the overlap of it, because a number of the different things you mentioned could fit into multiple categories. And I'm kind of right in saying that it doesn't really matter where you put it in, as long as it's a factor that you consider, because it's really a method to look at what's happening around you and what will be coming down the tracks, to then have a think about how that's going to impact on your business. And it doesn't really matter whether you stick it on the legal or you stick it on the economic, because it might be equally applicable to both. It's the consideration of it and planning ahead on what you're going to do to counter it, right? Yeah,
indeed. I mean, look, in a practical sense, I'm a consultant. And you've all had hopefully some good experiences, and you've all definitely had some bad experiences from dealing with consultants. But one of the things consultants have to do is we have to look knowledgeable, or appear knowledgeable, or generate some insights. And whenever I'm presented with a new situation or a new problem or a new opportunity, this is one of my go-to tools, and I will quickly rattle through in my head politics, economics, social, technology, economic and legal as environmental and legal as cues, and that's what they are, is they're cues. And there's, how you deal with them is entirely up to you, but they are cues. And look, it's not, the beauty of it is its simplicity. The challenge is that we're all so consumed with dealing with the day-to-day aspects of our business that we very rarely have time to sit back and go, what's going to happen next year and what's going to happen in the next 5 years. And too often, we've all been guilty of this. You build a 5-year plan, which is, what would my current business look like for the next 5 years, assuming that everything stays broadly the same as it is today. And it's not, you can do better than that, and you can use PESTLE as a tool to trigger those thoughts about what is going to happen next or what might happen next. Typically, people use it for threat management, but I think it's just as good a tool for opportunity management.
Excellent. Obviously, if anybody has any questions, I mean, please, by all means, switch on your camera and ask the question live, but also please use the chat functionality. By all means, please get involved. One thing that I wanted to ask, Philip, is when you're looking at this sort of framework, and like you quite rightly say, quite often you're going to go, right, what's the next 5 years, assuming everything roughly stays the same. When something as big and game-changing comes along, as for instance the coronavirus pandemic, is this a useful tool to not necessarily predict something like that, but to deal something with like that? Because you can't legislate for all the potential opportunities, right, or possibilities.
So to your point, Pim, that these categories are non-exclusive. Yeah. If something happens in the environmental sense, and let's call coronavirus an environmental factor. If something happens in an environmental factor, your point is exactly right. It will have consequences for all sorts of in all sorts of other areas. So take coronavirus, how does coronavirus play out across Pastel? Well, clearly it's had a significant political impact because Parliament was suspended and is now operating online. A lot of the normal rules of engagement have changed in a political sense in terms of winning and awarding and winning of contracts, particularly around coronavirus, but also in adjacent areas. It's had a massive economic impact. We all know about that, and social too. Technology has been enormously important in how we address this. Initially, it was wrapped up as the ventilator challenge, which of course Silverstone Technology Cluster and some of its members were heavily involved in. Fortunately, it turned out that the way that coronavirus presented itself meant that the ventilator need was not as great as people initially thought, and therefore the ventilator crunch never really happened because simple oxygenation seemed to do the trick. But there was a technological change. A vaccine is simply a technology. It's a medical technology, but a lot of effort was thrown at not just the creation of the vaccine, but the testing of it, and also now the production of it. There's a massive technological issue there, and of course, I mean, I'll throw taxation in as being a legal issue because it just makes it easier. Like James, whether you like James Dyson or not, whether you like his relationship with Boris Johnson or not, I think it is a fair question, which is, I've got resources that are overseas, which I'd love to bring to bear to help solve the problem, but I'd rather not, I'd rather not have to pay extra tax for bringing those resources into the country. So there are legal consequences too. So you're right, Pim. You don't necessarily need to look at these in silos. You may look at the second order consequences in other dimensions of the analysis to understand what those threats and those opportunities are.
Excellent. Again, please, if anybody has any questions, please chime in. One thing that I wanted to ask as well, Philip, is kind of the almost like the sources of the information, because if you look at some of those like the conspiracy theory guys out there who seem to create like their own little echo chamber and look for various sources and all that sort of stuff, it seems to me that it's relatively easy to make yourself believe whatever it is you'd quite like to believe, and you can probably find sources to back you up. I mean, I'm sure that if you type into Google, are bananas good for you, you'll get lots of results that back it up. If you type in are bananas bad for you, you probably also get a lot of results that back that up as well. How do you have any words around how you make sure you get accurate information or realistic information or whatever the words are for that?
So I think horizon scanning. Horizon scanning is a very difficult thing because it's very easy to get consumed with feeling that you have to read the whole of the Financial Times and the whole of the Economist and the whole of every other piece of digital information that's presented to us on the internet. And however you consume it, it can be completely overwhelming. I think, well, I believe, well, it's been proven it has been illustrated in academic research that networking is a very, very powerful tool for identifying information that you don't immediately have to hand. And the important part of networking is not staying close to the people that you already know and hanging out in that same echo chamber of a fixed set of insights. The most powerful people in your network are frequently the people who are outside your usual network. They're the ones who you don't normally speak to, the ones you don't normally talk to. They're the ones that nobody else in your network knows. Because if everybody knew in your immediate network knew them, then what they know would be part of your immediate network's insights. And this is where Silverstone Technology Cluster is very powerful, because Silverstone Technology Cluster is actually a bringing together point of people who don't necessarily have strong relationships at the moment. Some of them do, but at a physical event or a digital event, hopefully we'll return to physical events soon, the most interesting conversations are often the ones with the complete strangers in the room, because they'll bring a fresh set of insights, and often a fresh set of insights will be around what the future holds. But and that's that's sort of what fires innovation. Innovation is sometimes a collection of disparate facts and insights brought together rather randomly with degree of synchronicity, which happens to pop an idea into your head. And that's what I'd also add, as well as your network, is stop from time to time. Everybody has to stop and have some time in their day, or if not their day, then in their week, to think freely about what the future holds. And I know for all of us, me included, it's always very tempting to look at the next thing that's coming over the horizon that's urgent and important for today. But there is time to sit down with an orange juice, tea, a coffee, a glass of wine, a pint of beer, or whatever it is, and a pen and paper, and just doodle and scribble down all those things that have been on the edge of your mind for a long time, but you haven't actually had time to focus on. Because those are the things that you're not focusing on. The things that you're focusing on, today's distractions, are not necessarily going to be what helps you build your business in the future. It's the other stuff.
And absolutely. And I think, would you also say that because to me, it seems like the framework you just outlined is kind of like a great tool to help you look at horizontal innovation as well. It's like, what is my business doing? What are we developing? How can I apply it in other markets? What might be the opportunities? Would you go along with that, or have I completely missed?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's there's there are getting outside research. It sort of comes back down to what we talked about in my last webinar, which is how you build your sustainable competitive advantage. And for those of you that weren't in it, it's you need to do things. There are things your business do that are valuable to your customers, and you need to do that. And there are some things that you do that are valuable to your customers that only you can do, and you should build on those things. And there are some things that are valuable to your customers that only you can do that nobody can copy. And those are the most powerful things that you can build your business on. And if you take that insight into what it is that you do that is valuable, that not many other people do, and that nobody can copy, or it's very difficult to copy, and then you layer that against an analysis which could be PESTLE, it could be any other strategy framework, and say, knowing what I'm good at, knowing what my sustainable competitive advantage is, how does that play against the changes that are going to happen in the spheres of PESTLE, will hopefully reward you.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting, and thank you. One of the things that you mentioned, which I thought was a very good point, and it's something that I occasionally talk about with people as well, is kind of the thing you mentioned about Greta Thunberg, because it's almost like, it doesn't really matter whether you agree with her or not. It's the effect she will have on the environment, and it's kind of like, you don't need to personally agree, you just need to assess the impact of her words and her actions and what she's doing, and the ripple effect that causes. And I suppose occasionally it must be quite difficult to sort of disassociate your own personal feeling and opinion from something and just look at that ripple effect, right?
Yeah, and that's why I mentioned this whole idea of taking your Facebook hat off and putting your LinkedIn hat on, which is that we all have our own biases and our own insights and our own opinions, and I think for all of us, we think they're well formed and honestly held, but sometimes the world moves in a way that we don't necessarily agree with, but it's the way the world is moving that we have to deal with, not the way that we think the world should move. And I think that there is, when I look at social media, I think there is a difference between how people talk on Facebook and how people talk on LinkedIn. Sometimes not enough of a difference, but it is a slightly different mindset. Facebook can be a very emotional place, whereas LinkedIn hopefully can be a bit more rational. And we have to deal with what is happening and how the world is changing, and that particularly applies to the S in PESTLE, to the social stuff, which is how the world is changing, and what people think about and what's important to them and what's not important to them.
Yeah, Yeah, and your point that you made on sort of the next generation coming in and them having a very different outlook on life than you know we might have if I lump everybody together for a moment. You know, it's very interesting to consider. I'm very, very conscious that I'm totally hogging the limelight, and I very much shouldn't, and so apologies. But does anybody else have any other questions or queries or anything they want to bring in? Please do speak up. You know, everybody's always free to interrupt me at any moment. Anyway, I hope everybody realized that, though. That's right. But is there anything else from anybody else?
I'll just ask one question in the room, and I appreciate that people sometimes don't want to speak out, and that's absolutely fine. So if you don't, then don't. But you know, has anybody got any examples? I mean, I brought my examples of my own thoughts. Has anybody had anything in their business, a change in a Pastel, one of the dimensions of Pastel, that's created an opportunity for them? Or could anybody think of a business opportunity they've had and then reverse engineer that into the Pastel framework?
I'm very encouraged by the fact that Stephen has switched his camera on. Stephen?
Yeah, hi guys. But before I go down that route, I was curious about your bounce back comments.
Yes.
Just particularly interested to understand whether you think that's as a result of pent up activity, or whether people have a sort of resurged idea about doing stuff or spending or whatever.
Both of those things, Stephen. I think you've hit both topics on the head. One is that there has been an artificial suppression of demand for many things because people haven't been. I mean, this is a technology cluster, but people haven't been allowed to go to the pub and they haven't been able to eat out. Yeah, and so there has been a very artificial suppression of demand. And once you relieve that suppression, then things start going back to normal. And you know, the people who haven't been able to go out and buy new cars because they haven't been able to afford it will start earning money again, and then they'll want to go and buy new cars, and they'll think about buying an EV rather than an ICE, depending upon what their situation, depending on what the situation is. But then there is also a pent-up demand thing as well. And again, let me take automotive as an example. There are lots of people who would have been minded to have changed their car in the past 12 months. For a whole variety of reasons, but perhaps chose not to because I'm not using the car at the moment, so why should I change it? But cars get older and they all need to be replaced at some point in time. And all the people who would normally change a car at 3 years old, there is 12 months of pent-up demand there as well. Of course, what we do need to be careful of, and I think, Stephen, this is perhaps what you're alluding to, is that some of the recovery will be a return to normality, and some of it will be pent-up demand. And we do need to be careful, and this is where the economics bit counts, in sizing our business going forward. We need to be careful that we size our business for what the long-term demand is going to be and not get overly excited about what happens in 2021 and 2022 as the pent-up demand reveals itself. So it's a balancing act. And I don't know what the answer is, but it's somewhere between where we are at the moment and where we will be in 6 months' time, because of the pent-up demand issue. And it also, in terms of, for engineering companies, sometimes it is the susceptibility to economic swings is really high. They're very economically sensitive businesses. And when things go bad, the order book can dry up completely. But when things go really well, the order book can double in size compared to normal very, very quickly too. But I can't teach you about that because you guys deal with it all the time. So
we get delayed demand, which effectively means that people haven't had to order something for 6 months or a year and will actually do without. So you get some of the bounce back because there's energy and we want to go to the pub and spend some money in those areas. The car thing is a funny one because I think there is some pent up latent demand that hasn't happened. But because you haven't replaced your car for 12 months, it doesn't mean that you're going to sort of, the demand just flattens. It's just delayed it. It hasn't actually gained any sort of snowball.
It will come back.
It will come back to a normal of sorts. Like you said, the curious thing for me is the opportunity side. Yeah, we're looking at infrastructure and a whole load of other technologies as a demand, which has been postponed because of everything else in the world. So, talking to Pim the other day and later today, it's really those sort of things which are attractive to see whether, as a cluster, we could really try and stimulate further activity and further interest.
Yeah, look, and if you're a government, layering that back into the political side, if you're a government and you want to stimulate the economy, infrastructure spending can be a very effective way of doing it because it tends to manifest itself locally. Okay, so some materials may come from overseas, but it can create and stimulate jobs locally. And it also has a legacy, which has a positive impact on economic growth going forward. So, building infrastructure in the Oxford-Cambridge arc is going to be very good for Oxford and Cambridge and everywhere in between, and people around those ecosystems too. So, yeah, infrastructure spending can and maybe will accelerate in a post-pandemic world, and I think that's a good way of spending money, and hopefully it does. And then if you're an infrastructure business, you will get that pent-up demand. I mean, look, I don't know. I don't think in our technology group we've got the people who have invented the very smart pothole repairing machine, but there's a new very clever pothole repairing machine that works very effectively that I was reading about the other day. Look, the state of the roads is not good, yeah, but there's a whole load of pent-up demand there to go out and fix some of that infrastructure, and that would be great to see as well. So yeah, there will be, and all these things. I mean, it's like in a previous life, one of my previous lives, I was a fund manager, and when you look at how company share prices react to short-term swings in profitability, you get a company has, because of the issues that have been going on, a company has one bad year and the share price falls by 20%. And then next year, everything goes back to normal again and the share price rises by 30%. People's reactions to events sometimes amplify the event. So you get amplification on the way down and amplification on the way back up again. And unless a change is massively structural, then these things tend to come out in the wash, and things do go back to normal, and economies are self-righting. And it doesn't feel like it when you're in the midst of pandemic. But a year ago, we did not have any idea what the future was going to look like. And in many senses, a year later, we do know what the future is going to look like, and it's going to look pretty much the same as as it used to be, except for the fact we're going to have a coronavirus jab alongside our flu jab for many things. But the few things that change will change immeasurably, and I think working from home is a really, really big one, and that has issues for telecoms infrastructure. It has implications for housing infrastructure, because maybe now, rather, if you mandate a house, maybe now you want to mandate it to have, every house should have a study, maybe, a room that's too small to be a bedroom, but which allows people to work from home. I don't know, but these are changes that will happen. People are busy building sheds in their back gardens. I think people who have small diggers and can lay Cat5 cable from homes to sheds are probably doing reasonably well at the moment. I bet there's an ecosystem of people out there who are just building Wi-Fi networks for home offices, because they're not the easiest thing in the world to do if you're not a technologist, but everybody needs one. Maybe I should do that.
Actually, in answer to your question, Philip, I had a good conversation the other day about a guy running a specific project that I've made other members aware of, because I think there's opportunities for them to get involved. Some might actually be on a call today who have put in touch for that. But actually, that's very much for me. It's very much sort of an example of exactly sort of how to apply it and let's look at it, because it's kind of like a novel technology to do with combating flooding, and they've identified the UK as a big market for that. So it's effectively a system to help sort of protect your house in the event of a flood. But I should imagine, I don't know, 20 years ago, it wasn't a big thing. But actually, looking at the way the environment is going, in 10 years' time, it's going to be a hell of a lot bigger thing than it is now. And I think it's a really good example of a product that that probably wasn't a need for a number of years ago, but just looking at the way the environment is going and the world, sort of they've identified this and are pursuing it. And I think it's a fascinating example of that.
Yeah, it's all around us, and I hope that you guys will find some of those opportunities.
Excellent. Is there anything from anybody else who would like to make any comments or queries or anything like that? I mean, I love this sort of stuff. I think it's super fascinating. So I could probably hog the limelight some more, but I don't think I should. So.
Well, thank you very much all for joining us. I mean, if there are no more questions, you know where I am. You know how to get hold of me. I think I'm on the website. Pim knows where I am. You can find me on LinkedIn. There aren't many Philip guests around, and I look forward, hopefully, to meeting you all in person at some point in time at a future STC event. Pim, when's the first physical event going to be?
That's an interesting question. We are very much looking at that. I should imagine that we may well look into doing some hybrid events first, because we appreciate that not everybody might want to immediately jump back into physical events. It's very much something that we're looking for the latter part of this year. You know, I think we need to see what the obviously the legal situation is, but also sort of the practical situations, and obviously we want it to be safe. So I would definitely say, you know, last 3, maybe 4 months of the year is where we start looking at that sort of stuff. You know, we're very much hoping that we can do our annual conference as a real life event. We've got that scheduled for the 5th of October, if people want to make a note for their diary. So yeah, I would love for that to be a real life event, but obviously we do need to see what happens with the numbers and what we're doing. And just to come back on what Philip was saying, you know, if everybody does want to sort of make a follow-up with Philip or ask questions or whatever, I mean, all of you will be emailed with Philip's contact details, his presentation as well, and obviously a recording as well. So there's lots of opportunity for you to sort of revisit, but then also get in touch with Philip if there's anything that you want to pick up with him sort of offline and things. So yeah, hopefully everybody's happy with that. I thought, you know, I think it's fascinating, and thank you, Philip. You know, it's always to get your insights and your knowledge. But yeah, if that's everything for everybody, then I think we'll leave it there. As I said, you know, everybody will be emailed. Do check out sort of our website for some of the Be the Business programs that we're running, and of course, you know, all the events that we're doing and things. And please do also always get in touch with us. You know, if there's anything that we can do to help, then we will, because that's what we're here for. So please do get in touch. Now, what I would quite like to do, as per usual, is I'll run a little poll just to get everybody's views on what you felt of this particular event, but also importantly to give us your views on what you want us to do in the future and some of the subjects that you would like to consider. So when we tested it, it took about 40 seconds. So if you can please have a go at that, it's not the end of the world. And after that, essentially, you're free to go. Well, while everybody's doing that, I'll say goodbye to our viewers on YouTube. Thank you very much for watching. Like, share, and subscribe. I think they always say something to do with algorithms. So please do that. And thank you very much for watching. Check out some of the other videos, and of course, check out our website. But thanks for joining.